Welcome to another episode of The Greatest Pod, where we discuss and debate what makes something great. I'm producer Bill,
I'm Ed Greer.
and today this is a little bit of a companion piece to our Greatest Origins episode, which unfortunately I had to miss. So it's only fair that Ron now has to miss Greatest Deaths. We've done that. We've done the start. Now we're going to do the end.
Oh man, that is pretty funny. Yeah, we bookend it. I think Ron's positive energy is perfect to match up with greatest origins, the beginning, the nascent voyages of something, full of potential. And you're good for the punishing nature of death. It's
You know.
inexorable crawl. You are good to exemplify this, and I'm very glad to be discussing it with you.
I will cast my icy pall over this podcast. So, let me ask you off the top of the dome. What are what's one of your great deaths in all of pop culture, be it comics, film, television, what have you?
For my generation, my man, it has to be Tony Montana. There's a
Oh,
whole
oh,
generation or 3 of young folks and college kids and all sorts of ne'er-do-wells who just love to identify with Tony Montana's story and don't really mind his death. They
hmm
don't really mind it. It's a cautionary tale for some, but it's also like a top of the world, ma type of thing for others. It's like, hey man, if you got to go out, man, those dudes was trying to play him, and he just had to show him who's boss. He bit off more than he could chew. That's true. But fuck it, man. Sometimes you just got to go out. There's something like that to his death. But when you really look into it, it also has shades of the whole movie. Like that very night, he gets capped up a little bit by his own sister because her husband has been murdered by his punk ass, and his
hmm
jealous sort of, I don't know, what is it when you're not quite incestuous, but close,
yeah.
just jealousy that's fucked up her life, and she like takes some shots at him, and like that's part of why he's like injured when he's getting shot up later. It's just like that day was a bad day for Tony, and it was all of his chickens come home to roost.
There is something interesting comparing that ending to like the end of any Scorsese gangster epic, where
Mm,
Scorsese is often, always, I would say, very deliberate to show you that like these stories of the illegal rise to power end not with a bang, but with a whimper, and like
mm,
everybody just comes out worse in the end. There is something, if not triumphant, then at least like cheerable about the fact that fucking Tony Montana goes out on his own terms. He spends no time in jail. He's not
mhm,
bowing to anybody. He's going to
mhm,
take them all with him. And
mhm.
like there's a certain nihilistic glee to that.
Yeah, yeah. Just I mean, and it links to like ancient peoples,
Mm.
his like he's got a face full of raw cocaine, like, and he's got a mountain of it on his desk, and then he comes out with an M16 of any variety, but a really fresh modification is what he had in that movie with with the air holes on the side and shit,
Mhm.
and a underslung grenade launcher. That was like having a laser gun in 1982 or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
That was, you know what I'm saying? He came out with a big ass laser gun and just fucked everybody up, and it was like the ultimate in the home invasion fantasy of the American. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like a bunch of motherfuckers roll up and you just happen to be ready for all of them. He only got by a really cowardly little punk who ninjaed him from the back, you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
even then he took like, 2 elephant gun blasts, and then he fell into a fucking fountain that was inside the lobby of his home. I don't know if you can go out better better than that, really.
That's that Brian De Palma imagery. It's also, there are shades of classic Western stories and not even like fictional stories. I'm thinking almost of like the Alamo,
Mhm.
or
Yeah.
on the flip side, like the Aztecs trying to hold off the conquistadors.
Mhm.
That feeling of like he's the last of his breed, and like no one will ever achieve this power again. You know, it's sort of like the empire dies with him, and
Mm-hmm.
he's in his castle making that last stand against the invading hordes.
Well,
It
dude,
is it's epic and sort of mythological in that way.
and I mean, if we're gonna go deep on Scarface, let's do it. His whole comment to his wife about like, your womb is so polluted, you can't even give me a kid. It's like it seems like he probably dies without heirs, right?
Oh yeah.
Did I miss a kid in there? No, I don't
No,
think so.
you
He
did not.
dies without heirs, doesn't leave behind this generational wealth because it's all just stacked up cash. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying? Like he has built businesses and stuff. I'm quite sure that could be some funds of that could be handed down, but like I don't know, man. I just think once the law and probate and whatever the fuck gets through with all of his money, even if he had kids, it's weird. It's like the American dream. He didn't even get a chance to go legit enough to hand down any generational wealth that he made. His attitude towards being rich, his sort of a nouveau riche in terms of coke dealer rich, and his ambition to get way above that, but not learn any of the social rules or not abide by the social rules. Like, okay, if you're ever going to get to our level, at your level, you have to kill people's wives and kids. You have to do a lot of bad stuff to get enough cultural currency with us. You can get a lot of currency. You can be rich in that world, but there are certain things we will not allow you to do. Certain amounts of weight we will not allow you to buy unless you do X, Y, and Z for us. And when he bumped up against that, like, wait a minute, in order to truly achieve, I'm hurting fiends and I'm shooting up people who mess up my territory, but I got to hurt actual, real, innocent people in order to advance in this game. I don't think so. That goes against the code that I've adopted for myself. And the powers that be said, you can't do it that way, and we got to make an example out of you. It just there's so much to his death that it's like, a dream deferred. Didn't really have time to go legit. He probably wouldn't have gone legit because he had too many psychoses.
Yeah.
He caused every single thing that happened to him, but you could still see it as an injustice from a certain point of view. It's just got everything you need to be a classic death. So yeah, I think that was a good Kickstarter for us. Tony fucking
Very,
Montana.
yeah, man, very complex. I like that a lot. So let me ask you and warn the audience by extension, have you watched Succession and do you have any plans to watch Succession?
If you're asking me, I definitely have watched it. I haven't watched the actual last season because I was just gonna eat it this
Okay.
weekend. You know
Okay.
what I'm saying?
I'm gonna hold off and I'll just honorable mention there is a character that dies, um, and the way that it's handled and dramatically sort of the way it's used to spin other characters is one of the most satisfying deaths I've seen in media in a very long time. So I'll leave it there. If you listener have not watched Succession, get your ass to season 4 because some shit goes down in season 4.
Dude, I am definitely gonna do it. I'm gonna eat it this weekend. I
Love
really
it.
will. Because speaking of eating it, Shiv Roy, am I right?
Woo! Sit on my face. All right, moving on. Uh,
Hey, talk about greatest deaths. That right there would be one of the greatest deaths of all time.
oh man, to go out that way.
Hmm.
All right, so I also just saw Spider-Verse, and I'm not going to talk about it because we're in the window where not everybody's seen it yet. It is
Hmm.
amazing. Get your ass to go see Across the Spider-Verse, but that puts me in the mood to talk about the Prowler in Into the Spider-Verse. Miles
Mm.
Morales' uncle in Into the Spider-Verse, that blew me away when I first saw it because I did not see the death of his uncle coming to have that resonance with the Peter Parker story, to go
Yeah.
through that same sort of trial by fire. And the fact that it happens so without fanfare, like it's in the moment when he stops himself because he realizes, oh my god, this person I'm trying to kill is my nephew, I can't do it. Boom, literally the next moment, just bullet to the back because he hesitated, and that's
Yep.
it. And
Yep.
it just worked so well in that classic comic book trope of like all these things I could do and I couldn't save him, and I watch him die right in front of me. But yet the context and the circumstances are so different than the Uncle
Hmm.
Ben moment. are so
Mhm.
not what you would expect, not where you would expect that to happen. It both worked as like the most obvious echo of what you would expect while also being completely unexpected. And
Yeah.
I loved that complexity to it.
No, I really love that, and I love the fact that you know, the deaths in these things, the person's life has to have contributed to the story or
Mm,
another character in the story to such a degree that their death has any value. So it's really the greatest deaths is really sort of an indictment or an upliftment or whatever of having characters actually resonate so that when they go away, the people feel something, you know?
yeah.
So I love that, you know, if you're fighting your uncle, you shouldn't be superheroing. You shouldn't have done X, you shouldn't have done Y, and you're out there and it is sort of your fault, but you couldn't have stopped it like Peter, but technically you could have because you could have been a better Spider-Man at that moment.
Right.
All
Exactly.
this jazz, you know what I mean? It's got yeah, it's playing the lower register of that same melody or whatever you say in music.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's the minor key, right?
Minor key,
As opposed to the
yes.
major key. And
Mhm.
I also think, to your point, it speaks to the fact that they did so much with really limited screen time for that Prowler character in the movie.
Mhm.
Because
Mhm.
in the comics, I mean, the Prowler's been around for a long time, but he has always been D list, C list, maybe, as
I
far as a
mean,
Spider Man rogue.
big ups for making the Prowler somebody that Miles was scared of. It's an interesting psychological mechanism to like you just get these powers, you're a little kid. We established that he's a kid, and then like a real monster that's sent by the biggest kingpin in the city, this thing that is at his behest that just zooms and zips around places just so fast and so menacingly, and then yeah, it's your fucking uncle. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? It's great stuff.
Yeah, agreed. And I think kind of in that same bucket, less affecting, but still kind of meeting the same criteria I just laid out was the death of Aunt May in Spider-Man No Way Home.
Yeah.
And the fact that,
That one was great.
dude, I to this day I'll never forget. I leaned over, I forget if I was with my ex or with my brother, but I leaned over to whoever I was seeing it with in the theater and I'm like, "Holy shit, they just Uncle Ben to Aunt May."
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes,
And it's
yes.
like, it's the last thing you ever would have expected, especially because for, 3, 4 movies already, you'd had Spider-Man and it was just taken as a given. Like, Uncle Ben was dead. He had these feelings of guilt. They never got into the specifics of it, but you just sort of put it together like, okay, he has the classic Spider-Man origin. And then in that moment where she's injured and you're like, oh, phew, she's not dead. But then she says, with great power must come great responsibility. And you're like, no fucking way.
Yep, yep.
Like there's something so artful to really registering surprise with a death, especially in an adaptation where theoretically you should know or expect that whether it's that specific character or not, but just expecting that moment feels right. But to still be able to catch you off guard, that is a real narrative feat. And I gotta give that props.
I mean, I gotta tell you, I was one of the people who thought that they were just going to do the thing. They cast a young actress so that they could just run this shit into the ground
Yeah.
and have him, you know, worried about wheat cakes this and got to get to church that for years to come. I really thought that was the way. But what they did was so much, in my personal opinion, better than that. My only Marvel standums that really remain, I love the Avengers movies, and I really like a lot of things about the Peter Parker movies, but I've always yearned for exactly what they did at the end, which is just he's on his own, he's a super genius, but nobody knows him and nobody's going to vouch for him. He's got weird powers and he looks weird. And people think he's a menace, but the people in the streets know he's good. But he has no one to rely on. It's worse than having to take care of your aged aunt or to check in or to be under her thumb or to worry about. It's worse than that. you don't even have anybody to lean on, and nobody remembers you. You remember saving the world, and nobody else does, dude. Anytime he goes up to any of those guys, they're going to be like, get the fuck away from me, freak, or whatever they're going to say. Or he's going to have to beat their ass again and remind their ass. They're like, look, bud, we already did this, and I beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
So like, you don't have to talk mean to me, bro. You know, my costume fits real good. You know what I mean? I made it myself. You
Yep.
know, just the DIY aesthetic of this new Spider-Man, and the fact that he has no Aunt May to worry about slash have support from, it's kind of heartbreaking. Like, it starts out heartbreaking, and we see, you know, how he's going to deal with being a heartbroken, messed up guy, but his own
Yes.
guy finally.
And weirdly, his own guy, even with respect to other versions of Spider-Man, because it's like
Exactly.
while you leave him in the same place that you would want out of your Spider-Man, his journey there is substantially different, and that
Mhm.
is exciting in and of itself.
Yes, exciting is a big word, dude, because the status quo that sets up, there's so many directions you can go with that, but they all lead to scrappy guy against all odds, and that's what it's always been. It's supposed to be. He never got to sit at the cool kids table. He
Yeah.
never did. You know, classically swinging home with a Fantastic Four uniform on and a paper bag. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? Like, come on, dude. This guy just gets into jams. This guy gets locked out of his dorm room with a sock on his dick. You know what I'm saying? This guy, Calamity follows this guy, and
Yes.
they he would just Calamity up into the Stark Mansion, Calamity up into space in a super armored suit that could fucking fly. It had 100 kill arms. Just like
Mhm.
we never got to see like a guy in like a wrinkled suit jumping around. That like Spider-Man that they or intoned when Stark shows him on his phone, like, look at you in your shitty suit catching a bus or catching a car against a bus. That Spider-Man in Endgame jumping around. You know what I'm saying? I've
Yeah.
always wanted that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Well, you might get it because supposedly Spider-Man is gonna be like the de facto main character of either Kang Dynasty or Secret Wars, I'm not sure which.
Whoa.
So yeah, and that's a rumor that I am aware of. I forgot where I heard that or read that, but that seems to be the going assumption. And
That's interesting.
yeah, which might also, when you think about Secret Wars, Spider-Man, it might also indicate there's a black suit coming. Who's to say?
Yeah, I mean they've got a dollop of venom. Do the dollop,
That's
dollop of
true.
venom. Uh, There's a dollop of venom in the what they call the 616, what the nerds call the 1999999 universe.
Mhm.
But yeah, as far as also deaths that to me were effective in Marvel, if we're gonna be in this sector, I really think I wanted to be super affected by Gamora's death, and I think I was. I was able to accomplish that feat because it was the right type of senseless, if you know what I mean.
I do know what you mean. I mean, look, I'm on record already. I'll say it again. I think Infinity War is the best movie that Marvel's ever made. Like it's just a Swiss watch of a movie, and the fact that it does make you care about moments like that, where it's
Hmm.
like, man, I don't even understand why this is affecting me. But they just do so much right in the little bit of screen time that you get between her and Peter Quill, the little bit of backstory that you get between her and Thanos, the dynamics between those three characters. And then, yes, the senselessness of like Thanos is on this weird quest because he's just this absolute zealot. And like all she wants is love. And now she's found it with Peter Quill. And she sees how nuts Thanos is. And like by all accounts, she should get the satisfaction of being able to help stop him on this mad quest, given everything she's been through. And nope, now we're just going to throw her off a cliff. Like that is, it's so like, holy shit, like we're playing for keeps. It really
Hmm.
sends that message.
And I gotta say, we've now been years hence. People know that Gamora comes back as the 20, I guess 14 version of herself, and that self never fell in love with Peter Quill. And so it's like a death of the relationship, a death of that whole timeline of what could have happened. Little half Gamora, half Peter Quill star babies with super strength and bionic enhancements
Hmm.
running around. That's dead now. And but his Gamora is dead. Putting the possessive on women is always tricky. But like
Yeah.
the version of Gamora that loved him is dead. And this new one totally exists, and she will not, cannot be with him because she didn't have that special alchemy of pheromones
Dude.
and experiences that
Yes.
made her fall in love with him. That makes the death all the better. And there's some Twitter fuckers out there with their Twitter fingers who have taken to calling the James Gunn trilogy not all the way complete or super dope because the characters were kind of switched out and moved around because of the
Ugh.
events of other movies, and that's why it's not. If only they could have done a pure, this sort of ridiculous, zealotous, almost just uh these people are trying to base their personality on being upset about stuff that people uniformly find great, and I just don't understand that.
But people find it great with good reason, I think,
Yeah,
because and this I think harkens back to the how we've been talking about all the deaths. Like the purpose it serves in the story is so much more than just make someone sad. You know what I
right.
mean? And so suddenly, because the through line for in both the Guardians of the Galaxy 1 and 2 and the expanded universe movies has been that burgeoning romance, that slow burn romance. The fact that you can use her death to not explore loss from death, but literally loss of love in a relationship. And the
Mm-hmm.
fact that it turns the story in a way where now it's about how do you learn to love yourself in the aftermath of losing a great love, but not to circumstance, but just because they don't love you anymore. They fell out of love
Mm-hmm.
with you. I want
Mm-hmm.
to say it was Erica Badu that has said, like, possibly the worst pain a human being can feel is to be in love with someone and know that they don't love you back. And
Mm-hmm.
like suddenly that is the milieu in which you have to tell this story. And like I found that so affecting in Guardians 3. So
Yeah.
affecting. Yeah.
Yeah. It really means a lot when your character feels real emotions on screen, even if they're just, and I understand that's maybe rudimentary, but like when you really see true slobbering crying in a private setting in a movie, you know what I'm saying? You're just like, wow, dude. Oh, speaking of which, I'm thinking of Boogie Nights, where Amber Waves, played by Julianne Moore, is like crying, smoking a cigarette, and she's trying to call her kid. And the kid's dad or guardian is like, just fuck off. You can't call this late, you crazy porn bitch. This sucks. And she's just rocking back and forth, crying by herself. And Burt Reynolds, her ostensible husband, man, is just away from it, doesn't want to deal with it. He's out in the room drinking from a snifter and just having a cool smoke or whatever. He can't deal with it. These people aren't complex enough to deal with it. So he just leaves her to cry in the room while he, chills out on the deck and thinks about making porns and stuff.
Mm.
And I was thinking of, in that world where people are so disconnected, Lil Bill from Boogie Nights has one of the greatest deaths of all time in screen history, for
That is,
real.
yes. That's
I'm like,
William H. Macy, right?
yes.
Yes.
And he was like I guess the sort of gaffer slash sort of cinematographer type of guy, sort of gopher production guy on the porns that were done in the Boogie Nights movies and shit. And basically, his wife just sort of was very free and banging a lot of guys and sort of banged guys in front of him. He just kept seeing this over and over again, public the sexual acts from his wife on guys and maybe couple guys at a same time, and people
Mhm.
just gathered around watching this stuff, and he's just like, my wife's got an ass in her cock in the driveway. So I don't want to talk about the cinematography of the film. You know what I
Right.
mean? That whole scene. And just right as 1980 is being rung in at the party, he catches her again in the room, and in the party that he's at with his wife. He catches her in the room with like two guys, it seems, from the amount of bullets that he rains on these fools, because they have a tracking shot of him walking out to his car, grabbing his gun, and I guess maybe putting bullets in it, closes his car, locks his car. Knowing he's going to go in here and do a murder suicide, he locks his car.
Mm,
Beautiful touch.
mm.
Walks back in and just ends up shooting up the guys, and then he shoots himself right in front of, I think, a painting. No, there's a painting of Little Bill that gets put where his head got blown off later in the movie. But
Yeah.
yeah, to bring in 1980, just one character just couldn't make it to the decade yeah, transition. One character couldn't make it to that new era because he just been so beaten down, and of course his crime is inexcusable on all levels. But
Hmm.
it's like shows like just his, maybe him not being able to grok with the so-called depravity that he saw on the daily, and have how it in how it affected his life. He obviously found his wife on a porn set,
Of
and she
course.
obviously never left one, and he just thought he could like make a family in this world, and he couldn't because he didn't pick the right partner. Number one, there's so many people in the porn world who could probably be great wives and mothers, not this chick.
Hmm.
And he just had vested so much in the relationship and blah blah, and he just went school shooter or whatever, or party shooter, and it's fucked up. But it's like it you understand what I'm saying? It's almost like he's reflecting the human cost of living outside of social mores.
Completely. I've always found that death to sort of do two things in the context of the movie. Number one, you know, in the 70s, where the movie starts, they really go a long way to portraying the sort of like camaraderie of the porn industry.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it almost paints a very rosy picture. And of course, it's because you're seeing it through the eyes of Dirk Diggler, who's kind of a naive guy and, suddenly feels like he's found his place. That moment, that murder suicide, is where the entire movie turns. And
Mm-hmm.
it's also reflective, not only of the dramatic turn, but of the turn that the industry takes from being sort of like this sub Hollywood niche filmmaking piece to like this gross exploitive, you know, videotape in the back of a car type of
Yeah.
industry. And so
Yeah.
it's like him not being able to deal with all the things you just talked about is sort of the bellwether for like all of this is going to spin out of control, like whether you like it or not. And no matter how awesome it seemed when you first came in, again, in that Scorsese way, it just can't end well. Um,
Yeah, the honorable mention the fucking death of the guy in The Irishman. And I don't even have to get more specific to that. If you haven't seen the movie, the death of the guy, and the death that you kind of intoned that he's gonna have is so pathetic. And it's what you get after 100 years of service to this mafia ideal. You're a tight-lipped, you shot a bunch of people, you buried a bunch of bodies. Good on you, bud. But you don't get some great retirement. You don't get to be on yachts. You never get to be like the bosses. It's kind of, I think that death mirrors the Tony Montana thing in one way, and that's when you obey, you might end up like the guy, I paint houses. You know what I'm saying? You might end up with that life if you obey. If you don't obey, you end up dead earlier. You
mm,
know what I'm saying? It's like the Faustian bargain of being part of the so-called mafia, organized crime, this high table, if you will. All of these power structures, you're gonna live to be an old dude who probably doesn't get rewarded while you're chasing the carrot your whole life. Because it seemed like that's what he was doing. He was being loyal and chasing a carrot his whole life, and it got him a lonely death in a
yeah.
shitty home.
Yeah. It's like he knew nothing better. And so he was good at what he could be good at, but that doesn't that doesn't get you anything in the end.
And just like
I
the trauma of bringing war back. That one thing I liked about that movie, I wish maybe in my heart of hearts, I love Scorsese. A young person who was obsessed with a guy who brought war skills back. Obviously, I love the Punisher, but like anybody like that, what do you do with war skills? And those are what you have, but you don't really have this sort of bean counter stuff. You're one of the few soldiers who came back with no discipline. Really, he's disciplined in a way, but he's like, can I just shoot a guy? Can I steal some stuff? Can I just kind of get it going? I don't want to.
You know what's really interesting? a good exploration of that is Peaky Blinders. And
Mm,
in a lot of ways, it's a little bit more of a pulp exploration. I mean, The Irishman could not be less pulp, I
yeah,
think, because
yeah.
it's so sort of unvarnished realism and sort of unsympathetic and unsentimental in the way it portrays it. So Peaky Blinders, has a little bit more style and pizzazz, but it does do the thing where when you bring back all that violence and all that trauma and all you can do is crime to find something to do with it, it kind of gives you the other path where if you're going to move past it, you have to find a way to give it up in order to find a real life. And like,
Mm,
they do it bombastically. Peaky Blinders is not a sober Scorsese character study, but in the end, that character does have to find a way to give up that life in order to find like happiness and contentment. And so if you look at the long arc of that series, it's really about like putting to bed that trauma of war and those predilections toward violence. And tellingly, I guess they're making a movie now, but Tommy Shelby, who Cillian Murphy played, he never died in that series. He actually went on to live.
huh. Well, that's great. I love it when you actually do learn your lessons. But that's the thing about a lot of these deaths is like you really don't learn your lesson before it's too late.
I was gonna say, I mean, when you brought up the Irishman, I do have a soft spot for random deaths, and the one that comes to mind immediately is Donnie in The Big Lebowski.
Yes.
You know what I
Yes.
mean? Where it's
Yes.
like it's just there to reinforce the randomness of the universe. Like it doesn't really serve a larger narrative point. It's not motivating further action, but thematically it's just perfect. Like
Yeah.
in a movie that's all about how you cannot control things no matter how small they are or no matter how hard you try, the universe is going to always find a way to, quote, literally pull the rug out from under you. Like the coup de grace being the death of Donnie from a heart attack in a fight that they otherwise win is
Yeah.
amazing to me.
Well, I mean, the Coen brothers are good for a nonsensical last death, dude.
Oh yeah.
Um, because like, I mean, the one that just impacted me, I gotta call it one of the greatest because I still think about it all the time. Is in No Country for Old Men, where you
Mm-hmm.
don't get some valiant Tony Montana. I'm fighting 50 guys, and oh, they got me, but I took a bunch of them out. That's more or less what happens when Llewellyn Moss dies. That's more or less what happened, but they deny you seeing it because it would almost heroize the reason why he's in this situation. I mean, he did one good thing, which is go try to give somebody some water.
Mm-hmm.
Everything other than that, from the taking the money in the first place, everything about that was all wrong and all bad and could not end well. And that's why he ended up in a basically what the papers would say is a nonsensical death in a hotel. You know
Right.
what I'm saying? And all that adventure ended in this nonsensical hotel death. You can't get no lower than that. Motherfuckers be having nonsensical hotel deaths. You always look down on that. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
So
No,
it's like, yeah.
and I mean, I think that that also serves a purpose the other way down that metaphorical street, in that it makes you stop and think twice about the fact that, like, you so often hear about, random killings in the drug war. And it's like, it can often turn into just background noise. Like, oh, people found dead in a motel in the middle of,
Mhm.
South Texas. Like, oh, there they go again, but it shows you like, no, those are real people with real lives, and the
Mhm.
violence is totally senseless, but it's not just a statistic, you know what I mean? And being
Yes.
able to like, I find that to be the real triumph of that scene, is that they managed to encapsulate both things in one. Like,
Mhm.
yeah, this is random and faceless and you get no satisfaction from it, but by the same token it's incredibly impactful, and like that lack of explanation and lack of satisfaction is almost the point. that like you can't numb yourself to these things that are happening. You have to, you know, in a lot of ways inhabit the Tommy Lee Jones role of just it becomes so overwhelming you got to bow out of it, you know. It's
Yeah, I feel overmatched.
overmatched.
I love that. I also think when you look at Moss's wife, dude, like
Oh
her
yeah.
death is huge. I'm talking about huge because it's she has a great one because she refuses to play the game.
Hmm.
She begs for her life like anybody would, but when it really comes down to it, she refuses to play his game. And the fact that you know that she's dead by how homeboy checks his shoes as he leaves, it's just perfect cinema, perfect understated so-called subtext, all the stuff they teach the film nerds which they rapidly throw away to do video game adaptations. You know what I'm saying? Like all of that stuff that you learn. And we know a couple of people who apply good storytelling to video game adaptations, so even that's outdated. It's crazy though how hard it is to just use film and use somebody's death on film to kind of say all these different things. Moss's thing said what you said earlier eloquently, and her death was just like there are gonna be people who are gonna make you try to make you face up to what you actually are.
Hmm.
And you can listen to them or you can fucking kill them. And you can kill the messenger in the for the sake of I'm gonna keep up my ethos no matter what. I think this way. I must think this way. This is the way that I operate. And anybody that comes and tries to mess with that, they either get the boot or maybe you can listen to them and grow. Maybe if he had to listen to her about like his decisions really are his own, maybe he could have took a little second longer, would maybe leave her alive, thinks about it, takes a couple extra seconds, doesn't get hit by that car,
Exactly.
doesn't break his arm, all this bad shit. And I don't even want to talk about karma, but like that guy's karma is always going to be fucked up because he's pretending that he is the karma of the world. He is the luck. He is the thing that brings you luck or bad luck. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's the thing. It reinforces that, you know, convincing yourself you're not playing the game or that you have power over the game, you know,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the game is. It doesn't have to
Mm-hmm.
be life and death in the drug game, but it's like whatever you see the game is in your life, you are not protected by convincing yourself that you've opted out or somehow mastered it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're a disciple of Gary V or whether you're Anton Chigurh in that movie, it's like
Mm-hmm.
you don't believe the stories you tell yourself because life is always ready and waiting to show you that you're not in control.
Abso-fucking. So along those lines, do you think the death of Samuel L. Jackson in Jurassic Park really fucked me up for life?
Listen,
Because yeah.
we have to go down. I mean, yes, I want to hear your thoughts. We have to go down a road of just deaths that are epic because of how they happen, and like the wood chipper in Fargo was another one. As far as we were talking Cohen brothers, right? Like
Oh,
just yeah,
yes.
fucked up deaths. But go ahead on Sam Jackson.
Okay. We talk about fucked up deaths. Going back to Scarface, the chainsaw scene in
Oh,
the bathroom,
oh,
baby. Like, just imagine being like, I hate those times when like people are getting murked, and then like Tony Montana's next to get murked, so they have to have a couple guys get murked before he does. Just man, I was. You mean a couple seconds later, I could have gotten spared too? Those type of deaths really mess with me because they show that the hero is in this peril that they conquer.
yeah.
I think along the lines of deaths that are just spectacular in Kong Skull Island.
Oh
This
shit.
dude tries to have a Vasquez from Alien sort of just pop some grenades and let the creature take you type of rain of fire sort of death, and just gets smacked into a mountain and blows up ineffectually inside a mountain. It's one of the biggest memes on Twitter.
I
You can
love it.
type it in Kong Skull Island guy blow up or whatever. It's just so nonsensical and beautiful, and people don't understand that that's obviously the filmmaker's sense of humor. That was very much humorous, but it was also like lampooning this concept of like that you can be heroic when what you're doing is being on a dinosaur island helping scientists fuck over monsters or whatever. Like, there's nothing heroic about any of that. You can't go out like a hero if that's what you're there for,
And
you know?
by the way, as long as you're saying all that, let's bring it right back to Jurassic Park and talk about the lawyer who gets eaten off the toilet by T-Rex. That is
Yes.
undoubtedly one of the most iconic deaths in all of pop culture.
Yep. Yep. Just the cowardly at hiding behind a lattice work of nothing. You know what I'm
Well,
saying?
and abandoning children in the middle of a
Yes,
life or death situation. Like,
dude.
listen,
And did he
Spielberg
have some
knows how to make a hit.
documents? Oh,
Uh,
did he have some documents on him or something? It seemed like just this love of I put like a briefcase in his hand every time I think of that scene. He probably didn't have
yeah.
one, but I put some documents, him like hoarding some bullshit from the world. You know what I'm
Well,
saying? Over helping kids, you know.
he was the most amoral person in that movie, right? Like his whole attitude, and he says it, we're gonna make a fortune. As like all the
Hmm.
scientists are like, should we be doing this? Like, are there consequences? Whatever. And he's like, fuck no, we're gonna make so much money. And
Yeah.
the fact that he gets his in that sort of just iconically violent, nihilistic way, I think this is just so perfect.
Yeah, and big ups for Clever Girl. That's a pretty
Oh,
good death. That's a pretty good death to show exactly how they hunt, which is exactly what, Dr. Grant said earlier, and then we see it.
yeah.
It's a
How
great
about
setup callback.
I mean, how about Newman from Seinfeld with the fucking frilled
Oh,
dinosaur that spits venom? Like that movie
that
is so chock full of good deaths.
yeah, that's crazy. We stumbled upon a vein, like it's just a gold
Yeah.
mine of great deaths. But like, I just think Samuel L. Jackson's really impacted upon me because it was just like Homegirl was a fucking like alien, or rather, she was a fucking dinosaur dietitian. Not to diminish her work or her professorship, but that's I looked it up. That's what she was literally about. She understood what the dinosaurs ate. She was a dinosaur dietitian. Homeboy was a behaviorist, and I'm sure she had a lot of behaviorist knowledge as well. But honestly, the most important person in that space at that time was Samuel L. Jackson's fucking character. He knew that if the power came back on, he was going to press the right buttons to put the fucking monsters back in their cages or at least reactivate their cages. He was the most important person. And they send him out by his fucking self
Mm.
to and then when he dies, fucking homegirl is like, I think I'll go out there. And all of a sudden they got a bunch of weapons and resources they weren't going to employ to help my boy. And it just that has an impact, dude. That has an
I
impact on a young black kid, man.
Well, and the
Uh,
fact that he also gets the off-screen death, which is all the more horrible because there's the moment where his arm falls on
mhm,
Ellie, and
mhm,
it's like, what the fuck happened to this guy? Like,
mhm.
how did his arm get stuck in the pipes?
Right, dude. And Ellie being relieved to like feel his arm, that was pretty cool. And then she sort of walks around with it. So yeah, I just felt like, damn it. Trying to find a way, and movies kind of went overboard at future generations trying to find a way to be like, nah, we're not gonna kill the cool black guy. We got a couple other black guys that aren't quite as cool. We're gonna kill them in the first act. But this
Mhm.
black guy, he survives. Like fuck it, I think fucking LL Cool J survives Deep Blue Sea.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? We kind of stopped having this sort of sacrificed black guy that was pretty cool and personable, sort of a civil rights credit to his race, and then he got to get out of here to show how dangerous it is for these white folks. They kind of tried to flip it, you know what I'm saying? But like Samuel L. Jackson was one of the ones that I just first noticed as like that was nonsensical, dude. That
Yeah.
that guy, he could have been a great force for the rest of that movie, the rest of Jurassic Park with Samuel L. Jackson in it. The fuck out of here. That's a better movie. Than it even is. Than it
Yeah.
even is.
No, I hear you completely. I also think that maybe future movies took the wrong lesson from some of those, spectacular deaths because now my mind is going to that one Jurassic World where that woman gets like picked up by the fucking pterodactyl and then they fight over her and then she
Yeah.
survives and then she gets dropped into the fucking megalodon's mouth and you're just like, why were they so violent toward that poor woman?
Yeah, I that was that's been a subject of internet talk forever. Supposedly, there was something about like maybe wanting it to be memorable, and then people have interpreted it as that's her punishment for not being more maternal. You know,
Mhm.
like she and the main character Bryce Dallas Howard are like not maternal, but like she gets the punished for the sin of not being able to keep up with two teenage boys running around somewhere. Like what? That's a crime now.
Yeah.
People are really this trad movement is getting out of control, Bill. But yeah, as far as speaking of deaths, I really think that the way your main character goes out is great, but the
Mm.
villain dying is its own sort of thing. Can you think of any of those where you're just like, okay, that villain went out and that was cool. That was a good way to kill him. That was,
Yes.
you know.
So I've got one that is actually kind of a twofer because you get both the villain and the hero dying in this situation. But
Hmm.
if we're going to talk about a death that doesn't do the whole, oh, make you recontextualize the movie, make you recontextualize your thoughts about life and death, but is just a good, satisfying entertainment death, look no further than the Emperor in Gladiator. That moment
Ah.
when fucking dying Russell Crowe, who's been, sucker stabbed before he gets up there and is bleeding out, is able to block and then turn the knife back on him, and you're just close on his face up to the moment when his flailing gets him impaled through the neck with that dagger.
Hmm.
That was such a beautiful cathartic moment in the theater after sitting through that whole movie, to finally see that guy get his comeuppance, because he was just like Teflon through that whole fucking movie. And he ruins Maximus's plans like 3 times, like steps in and just fucks this
Hmm.
guy over. And finally at the end, oh, and then I still think the death of Maximus in Gladiator is one of the greatest heroes' deaths in all of cinema. Like,
Yeah, the fucking hand on the wheat. You just
oh,
can't beat it. You
dude.
literally can't beat that.
And from the mythic standpoint of like, he wins against this guy who killed his family and also corrupted all of Rome. And his last act before he drops dead is to declare Rome free again, right? He makes Rome a republic again, as opposed to an autocratic state under the emperor. And like, those are his last words before he goes to, Valhalla or Elysium to be reunited with his family. Like, it's just epic storytelling.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Let me see. The death of John Lithgow and Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger.
The fucking helicopter drives
while,
off.
while you're bullshitting, though, Hans Gruber dying by falling from a great height.
I mean, yeah, that dude and the gold watch from McLean's wife's corporate slavery is what he was holding on to, and then her letting that go to go, I guess, move back to Jersey and just be his broodmare. That's supposed to be the message. That's supposed to be the happy ending. Anyway,
Uh,
her corporate shackles are released as the watch is unclasped, and yeah, homeboy falls back towards a beautiful green screen representation of the ground, and the look on his face, supposedly he really was surprised on that take, and that's why it's so well acted, even though it is, Alan Rickman.
yeah.
I love Die Hard. Everything about Die Hard is fucking fresh. I do love the death of the guy who's like uh just talking a bunch of shit to John McClane, kind of shooting around and trying to get him, and then John McClane unloads his gun up through the table into the guy's like knees and nuts. It
Yes.
says, it tells him next time you get a chance to kill somebody, shut the fuck up or whatever. I I love that type of shit. Like I love when people get the like, I don't know about the stick around type of death from Predator, but obviously to me Predator went out pretty G. I
Mm-hmm.
kind of had never seen that concept before where it's like, oh, if I don't win, then fuck it, nobody wins.
Right.
That shit right there blew my whittle mind when I saw that movie.
Yeah. No, I mean, as far as villain deaths go, when you think of those great 80s movie monsters, none of them got as satisfying an end as the Predator. And it's a little bit
Hmm.
Tony Montana, right? Like the Predator
Yeah.
goes out like Tony Montana, like, I'm not going. I'm not going how you want me to go. I'm going out fucking kicking and screaming.
Yeah, say hello to my Fitbit. I'm gonna fucking blow up on your ass. Like, I love and I gotta say, man, the deaths of Homeboy's compadres, the fact that like in any movie where there is a slashing element, i.e., people being picked off by a singular night force of
Mhm.
whatever stripe, I think Predator was one of the greatest of all time. He was part Michael Myers, part magic, part mysticism of the real people of the world who knew about in the hot months the men would go away and blah blah. The real people of the world kind of know about this thing. But these soldiers, these hardcore soldiers who are like prone to get killed by this thing, they know nothing of it because you know what I'm saying? They're not real people of the forest. They come in there to do their business, but they're not the real people of the forest. And the one guy who adopted the real people of the forest ethos from the mud to the fucking shooting arrows and all that kind of shit, the one guy who adopted all of that made it out of that milieu. By adopting a more primitive ethos, he was able to defeat the technology. It was only when he threw down his arms that he really had the arms he needed to defeat the evil.
And
It's like
all
it's
the
you know
arms he needed were those two pythons attached to his body.
Hey man, you can't make a bow and arrow without muscles. I
It's
tell you
true.
what.
It's
So
true.
yeah, I love the fact that the Predators, as he was killing everybody, everybody's death was emblematic of the type of person they were. From Billy kind of just challenging it to a man on man fight to Bill Duke's character being like, I'm gonna fucking chase this guy. I'm gonna hunt him. And you're not though.
Mm.
You're not good enough. And just because Carl Weathers wanted to fucking make up for the fact that he's a CIA punk, just because you guys tag team up and have all this fire in your belly doesn't mean shit because this
Mhm.
motherfucker's from outer space.
Yeah.
And like their death, their ineffectuality against it wasn't boring. There was nothing boring about them being ineffectual against this force. It was always interesting.
It
You know what
yeah,
I'm saying?
it
That was a feat.
it's so far away from like your standard Friday the 13th type movie or even Halloween where it's like, all right, you've got a couple sacrificial, idiots essentially that just need to die so that everybody feels scared.
Mhm.
In Predator, it's like that's a whole different ball game because
The
you've
best of the
got
best.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, it's a great formula. So, as we're talking greatest deaths, I want us to get into comics a little bit. And of course, comic book deaths are hard to love because they're so often followed by convoluted stories of people taking up the mantle and resurrecting the hero, and like nobody stays dead. And then the ones that are like the iconic origin deaths are kind of like you're just sick of seeing it. So it's like, yeah, Uncle Ben and the Waynes and whoever were like important to those characters, no doubt. But it's
Mhm.
also like, I'm not going to put their deaths up as the greatest. But one I do want to give honorable mention to in Grant Morrison's JLA from the 90s, he wrote this storyline called Rock of Ages. And it deals with the heroes kind of fighting the forces of Darkseid across time. It involves a MacGuffin called the Whirligog, which is like a scale model of the universe. And if you possess it, it's like you have the ability to alter reality. And for an issue, you find yourself in a dystopian future where Darkseid has conquered Earth and killed every powerful hero. And the only couple heroes that are left to oppose him are like Green Arrow and the Atom and a few other like B League Justice Leaguers. But first of all, this issue is written from the point of view of death, which you don't find out until the very end of the story because the whole issue is just chock full of here. Like, I want to say Wonder Woman's not the first to die, but like there's just characters dying page after page, and you spend the whole issue going like, whose voice is this narration being written in, because it's this very loquacious kind of poetic consideration of all these people as they die. And in the end, um, they're not able to stop Darkseid from essentially destroying all reality, but they get in one last shot where Green Arrow shoots the microscopic Atom, who is able to jump off of his arrow through the pupil of Darkseid's eye, because if he can see, light must be able to enter. And he goes in and essentially destroys his brain from the inside. And that is at the moment where the universe collapses and the Black Racer is revealed, who's the new god of death. And you realize he has been narrating this entire issue, and it ends with him saying, and it is in this last moment as the last light flickers from Darkseid's eye that he realizes in the game of gods there can only be one victor. And it goes unsaid, but that victor is death. And I mean, it's one of the great comic issues ever written, certainly great Justice League issues ever written. And I just love that poetic treatment. It's almost Neil Gaiman in its perceptiveness, that like even gods must die, and to say like you've attained ultimate cosmic power, but the only winner in the end is death, is just, it's so chilling, but also so awesome.
Dude, I perfectly stated, perfectly recapped. That shit is great. And it reminds me of the fact that, like, when I was a kid, the Norse myths, obviously, as I've
Oh
stated
yeah.
on this thing, as I've stated on this podcast many times before, as a kid, they weren't exactly trying to teach you the African myth, except for some of the fucking Anansi shit. So it was pretty barren. There was always some kid whose parents were what people would pejoratively call woke these days, who had like fucking ankhs and shit in their house. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
And they were just like, yeah, really about Egyptology and shit. They would maybe do some of that shit, but for the most part, it was Greek mythology or fucking Norse mythology, and way less Norse mythology. Really, Greek mythology, everybody knew all the guys. Norse mythology was just so much more hardcore to me, because like their gods died. There was a whole big story about how their gods died. They like Loki knew that they were gonna die. You know what I'm saying? There was just something almost fatalistic to the brazenness with which even their gods lived. Their
Mm.
gods lived these hyper graduated lives, even more so than like Greek gods seemed to be really capricious and be fucking with people all the time. The fucking Norse gods went on like their own adventures and got into like trouble and shit. That was a key difference to me. What I'm
Right.
saying? Like, Thor having to lift the Midgard serpent, and fucking drink the sea and all this kind of shit.
Yeah, they
Uh,
weren't just obsessed with like what are we gonna do to toy around with humanity, which is essentially
right.
like every Greek myth.
Right. And wasn't one of in that story where he has to drink the sea and lift up the Midgard serpent, because they're basically some guys are being like, "Hey, can you lift this up? Can you drink from this cup?" And he's basically like doing these Herculean feats. While
Mm.
he's doing this, he's being tricked into Herculean feats because they think they're going to defeat him this way. And then they tell him to like wrestle an old lady, and she's beating him, and like the old lady is like death. So it's like
Oh,
nobody ever beats death. Nobody can ever beat the weight of age. So she's like either death or the weight of aging or some shit like that. Something inexorable and undefeatable. And he's wrestled her hella much. And they're like, God damn, this dude is wrestling off death. You know what I mean? So like
yeah,
that sort of storytelling made the Norse myths way cooler to me. And it was the presence of death, the ability
yeah.
of these gods to die.
I mean that, not for nothing, makes me think of one of our favorite recent movies, The Northman, and that has a gladiator-esque ending where both the hero and the villain sort of die in battle. And just for like sheer brutal, beautiful visuals, those are some amazing deaths, as they have like a brutal hand-to-hand combat in the caldera of a volcano. That's some amazing stuff.
Dude, it's beautiful and haunting, and I love that it's like look really nihilistic as well.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Although there is some hope, because, his wife survives with his child, and there's some hope there, which I appreciate in something that is overwhelmingly dark at times. They are even able to wrest some hope from that situation.
Oh, and speaking of great comic book deaths and how they never last, we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Jean Grey and what Jean Grey's deaths have meant to the X-Men. Like, I think the first one maybe was the most powerful one,
Yeah.
and I have since read the story that they were originally gonna publish, and I just thought that would be a really great move if they did that and stuck to it, and they stuck to it as long and as good as like perhaps Gwen Stacy death.
Hmm.
That could have been really great for the X-Men to have their own real Gwen Stacy,
Yeah.
but because it didn't, and because the Madeline Pryor and then the Gene coming back and stuff, they never really got to mourn the bitch, is what I'm saying.
Well, and you know what's crazy? It feels like Grant Morrison almost tried to do a mulligan when he did his new X-Men run because famously Jean Grey dies again in that run. And the whole thing is sort of coming on the heels of her and Scott drifting apart for very sort of diegetic reason, like very good reasons in story. And Scott sort of moving on with Emma Frost. And then Joss Whedon picked that up and really ran with that dynamic in his astonishing X-Men run. And it was very much about the X-Men sort of and especially Scott, Cyclops trying to get past Jean's death in the way that you maybe would have liked to have seen originally. But by
Hmm.
then it both felt too little too late, and they retconned that shit again. So it's like you couldn't let them live within that reality. And it kind of sucks.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why it gets such mention, because as legendary as it is, they didn't let it settle. You know what I'm saying? You gotta let the pudding set up before you start
Well,
digging your spoons in.
listen, I mean, as far as high profile comic book deaths that aren't given the time to settle, nothing will ever beat the death of Superman. like, like and it's well covered by this time, but as long as we're doing dishonorable mentions, not only was the death itself underwhelming, like Superman and a monster you've never seen before just beat each other to death and destroy, part of Metropolis as they do it. And it's like, that's pretty underwhelming. But the fact that it became such a cultural sensation, and famously, it was like a slow news week, so every major news organization picked up the news that Superman had died, and it became this big thing that like the greater American culture was trying to grapple with. But from the beginning it was only ever meant as like a sales tactic, and they
Yeah,
had the whole return of Superman ready to go before they even pulled the trigger on the death. And so it was never even intended to be something that had like a lasting repercussion. And I think, ironically, out of all that, it gave us a bunch of characters that are still extant in the comics. Like all four of those replacement Supermen are still around: the evil cyborg Superman, the Eradicator, which has like this whole convoluted history to Krypton, that cloned Superboy, who has since,
mhm.
shown up in both Titans on TV and like Young Justice, the cartoon. And then, of course, Steel, who now is getting an even bigger push in the main Superman comics. Like, for a story that was ostensibly about death, the fact that we got so many lasting characters out of the death story and the death itself is sort of the afterthought, I think is just pretty funny to me.
Dude, oh my god. Off the top of my head, I'm thinking Death of Batman is exactly how I'm gonna fucking uh like pitch those fools on my famous on this podcast. Cassandra Cain is the last man standing story.
Mm-hmm.
Batman dies. It's like
Mm-hmm.
that's the whole point of it. It's just like the death of Superman. You could launch these characters out of it. You could revive Cassandra Cain, fucking Barbara Gordon in a mech suit, whatever the fuck. You know what I'm saying?
Uh-huh.
So that put that kid Duke, says he's got light powers, put him in like the dark dimension or something. I don't know, whatever. I do hate almost every fucking other Bat character besides Batgirl. So maybe I'd have to go hands off on that one. Just like make Batgirl the linchpin and build what you would logically, with your dumb logic, think are the
Yeah.
people that would be cool around her or to counterbalance her stoic nature as the new Batman. Who you think would be like could complement her thing? That's what I'd probably tell editorial if I was like the big cheese, like Dan DiDio, and I could just make stupid swathing statements like that. That's what I would do. I would do that.
Yeah.
You would find your hierarchy of where Nightwing is. Is Nightwing a legacy character? Did Dick Grayson Dick Grayson die and there's a new Nightwing. Even it's like, oh, what the fuck, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I think the fact that you have to make the death reverberate and it's like this huge status quo change for all these other ancillary characters is
Yeah,
where comic book deaths get messy, especially when you never intend for the death to stick anyway. And like you see that with everything from like Captain America dying in Civil War all the way up to when they actually did like kind of kill Batman coming out of Final Crisis. He's
yeah.
not really dead. He's lost in time. But then they do the whole battle for the cowl where like all the Bat family members are trying to take up his legacy. And it's like, that shit is so overwrought, you know?
Well, yeah, because they think it's like, I think they never make it deadly enough. I'm talking about like they're all dead. You know
Mm,
what I'm saying? And somebody has to be Batman. And like being Batman is like the most dangerous job in the whole world now. Like
hmm.
due to political circumstances or whatever the fuck, being Batman is the most deadly thing, you know. Oh, and speaking of Batman dying, you we talked about it briefly earlier off air, but like the Dark Knight Returns, Batman's death in there, death in quote marks.
Quote unquote death. Yeah.
That is, I think the people who did the death of Superman thought that they could do something cool like that.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? In regular continuity, and they just spun it out of control.
Yeah. I mean, that to me is an all-time comic book death, even though it's not really a death, because it gives you all the beats you want, and then there's that surprise at the end. Well, because he's Batman, you know, even his death was a meticulously executed plan that nobody picked up on, even Superman, until the very last moment. And
Yep.
like it was such a satisfying way to end that story. It's hard to top that.
Yeah, and the fact that he's a human, so he mistimed it just a tiny bit,
Sure.
you know, and
Uh-huh.
Superman was able to see it, but like appreciate the effort and be cool about it because he really is a good guy in the end, even though
Yeah.
he's a fucking sock puppet for anybody in power ever. That's his fucking problem.
Hmm.
You know, uh that it in that iteration of him at least. So that was really cool that it was like a new start and a new way to fight crime as an actual symbol. I mean, people have picked up that and tried to run with it in all different directions, even Matt Reeves a little bit.
Mm.
Batman and the Bat organization. And to a certain extent, like Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated type stuff.
Yeah.
They're trying to hint at Batman being a symbol to like inspire other people rather than like this fear thing. It's like that's a section of the Bat mythos now. It's a new addition, I think. But you know, but it also harkens back to the Silver Age when he was like hey chum, let me, you know, help you old lady walk across the street. Oh, there's a giant key, you know.
Yeah. He was a deputy of the Gotham police force at that point, you know? It's like,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that key was the key to the city, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that stuff, it harkens back to that a little bit, while also being, of course, modern comics,
Yeah, I
bowing
mean,
to the corporate nature of Batman.
but I think what makes it so affecting is that it is a death in so much as it's like he's put Batman to rest. You know what I
Yes,
mean? Like the
yes.
idea of what Batman is and how Batman operates and what Batman does to the city is all gone for him. And now it's about I have to find a new way to accomplish these goals that I have.
Yeah.
And that really is such a it's one of those complicated, it's both hopeful but open-ended and not entirely satisfying, but satisfying enough. And then the fact that they lampshade that by him saying this will be a good life, at least good enough. Like it's kind of sad that they have since returned to that Dark Knight Returns world to do sequels because that was such a perfect capstone in that Batman died almost physically, but certainly ideologically. Um, that to me, like that's the only way Batman's story can end. Like you don't want to see him in the grave for real. You want to see him escape death, even as Batman as an idea kind of dies, so that it can be reborn.
Dude, and, I love all of that, I love that point. I also love the fact that Batman is, like, he's bowing to the fact that he has to get new methods and all that,
Mhm.
but it's also killing the zealotry. There was some sort of zealotry that was happening with his inspiration of the kids before because of the symbolism. It's almost like the symbolism had come back to bite him in making these people like, I am the face of the bat. I chop off robbers' fingers and shit. He didn't want that. He wanted an organized force to help him and be down with him, but he didn't want that. And
Right.
it was the fear of the bat thing, the whole thing, the motif that he had to like dismantle. And I just think it's so funny that for every one of these Twitter fingers takes of Frank Miller made Batman a fascist, he also acknowledged that that was the fucking case, also made a case against the zealotry of that, and at the
Completely.
end left him in a status quo that was the fucking future the liberals want. At
Yeah.
the end, that's what the end of Dark Knight Returns is.
Agreed. I mean, essentially, the end of Dark Knight Returns would be like if Donald Trump in 2019 meticulously arranged to fake his own death just because he felt like, I don't like what's going on in this country. Like all of this, all this transphobia and racism and sexism and general assholery that I've inspired in everybody is not the path that we want to go down. So I don't want to actually kill myself, but I need to at least die metaphorically so all these assholes can stop rallying around my worst impulses. Like
Hmm.
that was the Dark Knight Returns ending.
Yeah. And I just think that was so interesting that it has many like false deaths. His
Mm,
first retirement was a false death. Jason's death was a death in that story, but turned out to be a false death in
mhm.
later stories. You know what I'm saying? Like the death of the superheroic ideal seemed to have died in that story.
Yeah.
And speaking of, I think we were going to talk about Watchmen, right? There are some deaths in Watchmen.
Yeah.
But just real quick, I just want to talk about the death of John Osterman. That
Mm,
kickstarts the whole. I just think that the him being obsessed with watches and being a little late to get out of the fucking hadron collider or whatever the fuck atomic disassembler or whatever he was working on,
right.
there's a magic symmetry to that, and that is a brilliant death. And the fact that that gives him that new weird cosmic life, it's really sick.
Yeah. I mean, look, there's not enough we could say about Watchmen, but at the same time, what are we going to say that hasn't already been said? But I will just echo your sentiment that, like, there is such poetry to, like, my entire life, my father wanted me to be a watchmaker, and time is the thing that ultimately both kills him and then remakes him and becomes the thing which sort of divorces him from human experience. It's
Yes,
all
his
about
experience
time.
of time. Yeah,
Yeah.
his different experience of time disassociates him from us. Yes, beautiful. And but yeah, like and just I think you were talking about Rorschach. I think
Yeah.
Rorschach really, as a character, misunderstood, and you had a couple good points about that.
Yeah. And I mean, I can talk about Rorschach for a long time. And I think that the Zack Snyder movie should get a lot of the blame for turning public opinion on Rorschach. I know there's always been comic book edgelords that have sort of lionized, like, oh yeah, he's so committed to his principles that he's fucking willing to die for them in the end. And it's like, oh, that's what you're cheering? Like that's what you're taking away from the book? Like that's pretty fucked up. And then to make a movie where like that is the subtext of the scene just really grinds my gears. But in the original book, the whole idea was that Rorschach realized that his morality didn't work. And so he kind of, famously commits suicide by cop in a way where he threatens to expose the whole plot and sort of gives them no choice but to kill him in the end, down to the point where he's asking Dr. Manhattan to kill him. But I've always read that, and I think Moore intended that to be a moment where Rorschach realized that what Veidt did was going to work. And the fact that someone could bring about world peace by doing this large scale, horrible thing was such a complete refutation of his black and white, good and evil viewpoint of the world that
Mm,
he could no longer live in that world. I mean, it's a little bit to go back to an early part of this conversation, Tommy Lee Jones in No Country for Old Men. Like, I feel overmatched. That is Rorschach's death in Watchmen. Is like, I cannot
mm,
handle being in a world where this works. My world is about people know what bad is and punish bad. And in Veidt's victory, suddenly Rorschach has to confront the fact that he was wrong all those years, that he had subscribed to that black and white mentality of I know what bad is and bad begets bad and I need to cut it out like a cancer. Suddenly, nah, bro, you were wrong. And that's why he's crying when he rips his mask off, not because he's so committed to his ideals that he's, crying with righteous fury at how, wrong everybody is. No, it's his recognition. I'm the fucked up one. Like, I never knew right from wrong. I never could see the world as clearly as I convinced myself I could, and
mm-hmm.
I can no longer even stand to live in this world because of that. And that's what his death means.
Yeah, it's almost like the the people who can't stand the new world that is being made and how fucking bad. And ironically, he sends his journal about all the goings on, his meticulous transcription of all the events. He sends that to a right wing fringe magazine, and they
Right.
may or into their slush pile, and they may or may not publish it, which kind
Well,
of shows what Alan Moore kind of thought about his whole missive or whatever. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Not just that it would go to that, but like those are the type of people who would want to hear that this new utopia was somehow wrong.
but keep in mind, when he did that, he was expecting he might die, but he also thought that he was uncovering a plan to end the world. Like, he
Yeah.
thought he was uncovering a plot by Veidt to instigate World War III, which would have fit his worldview completely correct. Like, bad man does bad things to cause bad outcome. And
Hmm.
so, me being good guy, I go to stop that, and I
Right.
may
Right.
fail, but somebody needs to stop it even if I fail. But the
Yeah.
but he it gets totally turned around on him. Like, Veidt wasn't doing all the bad shit to start World War III. Veidt was doing all the bad shit to create lasting world peace. And like, suddenly in that moment, Rorschach is undone. And so that is almost a coup de grace on the point that I was just making, in that, holy shit, he sent his journal, and sending his journal is not going to save the world like he thought it was. Sending his journal might be the thing that causes World War III,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Absolutely. So yeah, the last his last dying thing might undo everything.
Exactly.
And and he thought he was the savior, but he might be the yeah, dude. That stuff, I mean, and that's a far cry from some of the deaths that I was thinking of earlier when we were talking about comic book dudes. Because honestly, when Wolverine gets destroyed as fuck by that Sentinel in Days of Future Past,
Yeah.
it just really stuck with me. When I was a little kid, I read, the Mark Silvestri, I'm old enough to have like picked up at the newsstand, with my pageboy hat on. I had been picking up Mark Silvestri issues of X-Men, so maybe 88 as a little kid picking them up. And man, when they introduced when I went back and looked at back issues and I found out about the Days of Future Past, I went nuts. I was like, wow, that shit's crazy. And then Wolverine jumps into action with his Reed Richards hair, like, oh, what's he about to do? And he just gets blasted to shit and he's
Yeah.
dead. I'm
Yeah.
like, what?
I mean, again, that's one of those great things that you can do with, possible future stories where you are writing definitive endings for these characters.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's taken full advantage because, again, sort of the hopelessness of it and the
Yes.
the anti-heroic nature of how that went down is just so
Yes.
perfect.
Abso-fucking oh, and you know what? Not to veer off of comics too much, but we're talking about some of these sort of ignoble random deaths
Mm.
mixed in with some of these larger deaths.
One of my favorite kind of meaningless deaths, but I don't think it's meaningless in the way that you're intending meaningless to be, is actually how the Fast and the Furious franchise handled Paul Walker's death, where like he died, but they didn't want to give him an in story death. And so they've sort of resigned him to the limbo of fatherhood, where like I know it's not intentional, but just because of the way they handled it, it's like, well, fatherhood becomes a spiritual death where you're no longer involved in the family that everybody's always talking about, and you can no longer have adventures. It's like you have the soul death by deciding to become a father, and it all just comes from the fact that, you know, I guess out of respect, they didn't want to give his character an in-universe death, but like avoiding that almost makes his real life death feel worse in the story, because now it's like every subsequent movie they have to pay lip service to the idea that he's still out there somewhere, but he's just this spectral presence that they never see and is never able to have fun with them. I don't know, man. Like that to me is one of the most ignoble pop culture deaths because of just how poorly it was handled.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, but you've had one of your friends get married and started having kids, man. It's like they get sucked into heaven. They're away, and maybe they'll call you and tell you they're in hell. But I'm telling you, as far as what it seems like, it's like when your friends get famous, where your friends get married, super married up outside of your friend group, or famous. It's almost like they get raptured up into heaven. Like they just disappear. It seems like the shit doesn't work anymore. And it's like a metaphor for that, but it is funny that these dudes are like literally saving the world, and Brian is like, I'm at a little league game or so. Like, you
and
guys are saving the known universe, flying cars in outer space. I can't get in on that. I gotta go to the kid that smacks somebody in the face.
and
You know,
like
they're calling him a bully.
all of these past movies have been, the villain has been so fucking personal to Vin Diesel. And it's not just like, I got to save the world. It's like, no, I'm coming for you and I'm coming for
Hmm.
your whole family. And like to the point where Brian's wife will show up and like kick some ass and be involved. But fucking Brian's watching the kid. He's just forever watching the kids as everybody else hangs out. Like he can't even show up to the fucking barbecues at the end of the movie, and we know why. But like
Yeah.
somehow in the logic of the movie, you just have to accept it. And like, I don't know. I just think that kind of sucks. It just kind of
But
sucks.
hey, sometimes your family makes you not be able to hang out with your family, like you said. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like when you have a real family, it takes away from your fake heist family. You know what I mean? It's just, it is what it is. I also think though that as far as deaths that people had to work around, um, in I think the way that everybody dies in The Crow. I'm not even talking. We're not going to talk
Oh,
at length about the Brandon Lee thing. He did die. They had to work around it to complete the film. The movie's about death a whole bunch. The death of Eric Draven is like iconic, you know,
mm,
and he comes back, you know, from that death. If that death wasn't so fucked up, it'd be less iconic how he comes back and pursues his revenge. A lot of the deaths that are in that thing, from like taping a guy more or less to the steering wheel and shooting him off a pier, blowing his car up. I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot of cool deaths in there. And I just wanted to bring up that as like death as the motif. And I remember reading like Death Takes a Holiday and all that Neil Gaiman shit.
Yeah.
Death on parole, Death goes to fucking camp. All that shit he wrote about death, doing death, the high
All the
cost of
Ernest
living.
movies with death. Yeah.
Yeah, death, the high cost of living, all that
Yeah.
stuff. I read all that stuff, and seeing death as a character who like features in people's lives, even if she's not gonna like kill them, or she kill somebody they didn't know, or you know, just there's something about how we've seen death represented. And so all I'm saying is when I see characters die, sometimes I will flash to be like, oh, what kind of death grabbed them? Like what
Mm.
kind of death, what kind of death is grabbing up the guys that John Wick kills? Is it just like a train going like a bullet train to Tokyo just fills up with souls?
Yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Well, like, you know what that makes me think of is the ghost policeman from the 3rd issue of Planetary, where it's like the Hong Kong issue,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's like a riff on the Spectre, but he's like a Hong Kong kung fu police guy, and he's capping criminals in the streets of Hong Kong.
Yeah.
That's the version of death that comes after all those John Wick guys.
Dude, so they get killed by that in life and then they get killed by it in death.
Hey, I mean, they're not having a pretty afterlife after being thugs their whole life, you know?
Dude, oh, speaking of greatest deaths, the way that fool goes out in Ghost, the main
Mm,
bad guy who's betraying Patrick Swayze's character, he gets dragged to hell by the little gremlins and shit. I mean,
yeah.
it looks a little Smurfy, but there's something cool about it. The way the shadows are formless and like the demons are made more by your mind than the special effects crew. You know what I'm saying? There's just something interesting about that version of death, from the flying up into the sky to the limbo that you're trapped in, and you have to learn how to influence physical objects as a ghost. You have to learn from ghost senseis on trains how to fucking go about the world if you're going to be a ghost and be of any utility to your
Mm,
loved ones that are still alive, so on and so forth. To, jumping into people. I just think that like his death as a senseless street act, and then you find out it was a conspiracy, and then he ends up contributing to the deaths of like the robber dude who was going to kill Demi Moore and his best friend who put the guy up to it.
yeah.
I just think those were really like, for a movie of that, rating and style, those are some pretty great deaths.
There's something that movies can do with death, and I think you kind of hinted at it there with what you were talking about, where it's not so much about like plot or meaning, and it's not so much about like, the cleverness or the goriness or like, oh, I've never seen that before. But like movies can really make you feel death in an uncomfortable way. And I remember as a kid that guy's death in Ghost as like the shadow hands just come and creeping up and sort of drag him to hell.
Hmm.
And the other one from my childhood that really had that fucking effect on me of like, oh God, this just makes me uncomfortable in some way was fucking Murphy in Robocop.
Oh yes, I think I had that and lost it earlier. Thank you for bringing it back, brother.
Dude, when fucking Clarence Boddicker, Red Foreman, is just gleefully taking him apart with a shotgun, and like they're showing it, and like the juxtaposition of like how traumatized and in pain Peter Weller's performance sells with how unbothered all these assholes are, like that is just disturbing to watch. And like that's a thing that you won't get out of comics or certainly television most of the time, but like there are just certain movies that hit you in the gut with the portrayal of death.
Well, dude, speaking of which, almost the first 2 hours of Saving Private Ryan
Oof.
are about depicting death and like this simultaneously unsympathetic and I, I've used the word nihilist a couple times towards Coen Brothers things and certain other deaths, but like the first 3 rows of guys jumping out of the boat just getting mowed down and you're just lucky you're not them,
Mm,
it's pretty fucking nihilist and pretty much acknowledging the sacrifice those guys made. You know what I'm saying? Where it's just like, yeah, the way we were deploying fools back then wasn't really, it was kind of Starship Troopers esque.
yeah.
And like, if you were one of those Wisniewskis or Rakowskis, you might get your ass blasted hopping
Abs-
about this motherfucker.
you
And it's no
just-
fault of your own. There's no whether you're a hero or not. You could be Audie Murphy. If you in that first 3 rows, you getting laced up like a goddamn Jordan. You
mm,
know what I mean? And it
mhm.
just is what it fucking is. So that shit was really affected. The guy walking around looking for his arm. But the most affecting death out of all that, people got blown up. People got sticky bombed. People bombed themselves trying to put sticky bombs on tanks, which I loved. People
Mhm.
try to do all this shit. But when Upham, I think his name was, the like kind of coward guy, there's a coward guy who didn't help his buddy. The buddy who gets killed, I guess he's a Jewish cat, who gets stabbed by the Nazi, and the
Yeah.
Nazi stabbing him and just telling him to be quiet and let it happen, and it's all good. Don't worry about it. You can rest,
Oof.
dude. I'll never ever forget that shit, dude.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
It's one of the greatest on-screen deaths ever because it's like just the sureness with which the German was killing that dude. Like the just I'm ridding the world of fucking vermin. I'm snapping a chicken's neck. You know, this isn't murder on any level. This is simply expediency. It went even beyond a soldier respectfully killing another soldier. It went
Right.
way beyond that to the extermination angle, which is what the whole thing was about. It was just and Upham not helping. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like just like looking at that shit happen and just like it reminds of us like how we are so afeared of death
Yeah.
that in real life we'll like let people. There was a couple Twitter stories, I'm not going to go into it, but a couple of news stories rather about people just sort of standing by. We talked about Rorschach, that great apocryphal murder of that lady where basically
Mm.
supposedly everybody just kind of watched her get stabbed and just hey I'll call the cops after 15 minutes of continuous stabbing. I think that makes sense. Or I'll
Hmm.
just shut my window at, response to crime. And there's some shit going on these days where people like literally video crimes, like straight up assaults,
Mm.
stabbings, murders, people getting hit in the head with big rocks and shit. And we're just so scared of death that we'll like not help somebody avoid death. You know what
Mm.
I'm saying? We're like so scared of it ourselves that we convince ourselves that not getting involved is smarter and all this like this basic stuff that I feel like maybe it's been in our DNA forever. I'm not saying we were always jumping in like superheroes. I don't think as a species we're that brave, but I'm just saying it's like we have a capacity now to record ourselves being cowards in a way that I never saw before.
Well,
Maybe
we've
that's my
also,
point.
I mean, we've also spectacularized death, right? Like we've turned death into a spectacle.
Yes.
And I think because we collectively have such a hard time dealing with it, and I think actually you bringing up Saving Private Ryan and specifically that moment is a great context because it's so unlike the type of death you normally see in movies, and
Mm-hmm.
it's so chilling for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
It almost speaks to why we have to turn death into a cool thing or a funny thing or a badass thing,
Mm-hmm.
because it's like we don't want to deal with what is the reality of just looking into someone's eyes as the life fucking drains out of them. But then there's a weird feedback loop where when you turn death into entertainment because you don't want to deal with the reality of death, then suddenly the reality of death to a certain extent becomes entertainment. And so it becomes something that maybe you're more, I don't know, I feel like being able to just sit and watch death is a very peculiar trait. Like it is neither fight nor flight, right? Which is like
Huh.
the instinctual response to, oh shit, somebody is dying. Um, the idea of just watching is feels unnatural, you know.
Well, oh, dude. Well, oh man, trust us to get metaphorical, especially about death.
Mm,
But bro, okay, how? Oh my god. Okay, as a fucking animal, you notice things get killed when you kill them
mm-hmm,
and when you narrowly escape getting killed because your homie got killed.
mm-hmm,
Those are the times you see death. You may see carrion, you may see dead bodies, but those are the times you see actual death, right? But us as a species, we've made all these devices and screens and shit that we can see death over and over again to the point where I'm not even going to make the desensitized point. I'm making the fuck you being desensitized to it. It's fucking up our natural, like you said, fight or flight mechanisms.
that's
How
what I'm
we've
saying.
seen
Yeah,
so much death. Yeah, that is great. I mean, that's a great point. That's chilling me to my
it's
fucking very core because
well,
we
right.
become these lemmings who probably run toward death. That's why we have videos of people literally dying because they choose to tape the train coming at them rather than getting out of the fucking way. It's like this confluence of like, I don't know, that like it's worse than a dumbening, right? It's an
Yeah.
it's a installed insanity protocols in in regards to death, right? Because like we should be able to use our intuition, use our soul and shit, or use whatever that ephemeral what's that proprioception you talk about.
Mm,
We should
mm-hmm.
be able to use that to avoid the murderers in our neighborhoods, the killers amongst us, things of this nature. But we're watching a murder documentary with this guy with these Dahmer glasses. And next thing you know, we're in a goddamn freezer because we're so inured to death that we can't see it when it's in our fucking face.
Yeah, man. That to me, so maybe this is a good way to round out this conversation because murder documentaries is almost the more innocuous version, but the real line of demarcation for me where I started going, man, this is so fucked up, was in those Wild West early days of YouTube when you were seeing terrorist beheadings on YouTube.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to this day, I have never watched, never wanted to watch, never made any gesture to watch one of those videos because I'm like, why would I want to watch a real person get brutally murdered?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that those went viral and like enough people were able to just, I guess, for the spectacle, for the experience, for the thrill, whatever, were able to do that. Like that's where I really started going, what the fuck? Like
Mm-hmm.
that is so that I think just speaks to this idea that like culture has turned death into something unnatural. And I think that might be unavoidable in a lot of ways, but like you
Mm.
said, in the animal kingdom it's fight or flight. But in
Mm-hmm.
the human kingdom it's a much different beast.
Dude,
And like
fight, flight, be a Karen, record it, do some combination of all those things, call the cops, fucking, call your
yeah,
buddies to come have a public fight that you record rather than calling the cops. You know what I'm saying? There's like, what? That's six things. In
I,
nature, there's two things. In
right.
in life, in society, there's six things, six, seven things you can do when confronted with anything deadly.
And I think, I mean, maybe on a little bit more of a hopeful note, I mean, part of the reason for that might be the fact that we have self-awareness, because it's been proven with animals, animals go through this whole sort of physiological anti-trauma mechanism. So like a gazelle, when it narrowly escapes a cheetah, it will get to the safe distance and the herd will stop, and like gazelles will literally go through like a period of intense shaking where it's like on one level it's their body trying to get rid of the hormones that are racing, that the endorphins that are like allowing them to flee without regard to like their breathing or whatever the fuck else. But there's also a neurological reset that happens where like they have to shake the experience of almost dying. And then as far as we can tell, most animals are able to then just get on with their lives without thinking about death, because the concept of death is a higher level thought. And so the fact that we are self-aware and are capable of higher level thought means that we kind of have to live with the reality of death day in, day out, even when it's not stalking us from the nearest tree. And that is something that's very unique in nature. And I think in a lot of ways, we still haven't figured out how to do that, how to deal with our own mortality. And so, yes, it is fucked up to turn death into spectacle, but it's just one more way that we're fumbling with like what it means to be self-aware in the universe.
Well, and as a capper to that beautiful eloquence, I will say, I think the point of us doing all these stories is to give our lives meaning because we know they're going to end. So
Mm.
if they're going to end, they have to, quote unquote, have to mean something. And with the gift of storytelling, we can explore like, what did your life really mean if you signed your life away to being a mafia assassin who didn't even really get rich and get hoes? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Mm.
how the fuck you gonna go back to your wife like some kind of steel mill worker every day for 60 years and you're capping fools in the head? You don't even get the Ace Rothstein pink suit, blowjob from Sharon Stone on coke. You don't get the same amount of blueberries in your muffin because you're the boss. You're just some asshole who puts
Mm.
like nipples on the ends of his gun as primitive silencers in the 20s or whatever the fuck. You're just some loser, not the 20s, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You're just some schmuck who keeps the killing machine rolling. You're a foot soldier in the game. That a movie, talk about The Irishman, a movie that looks at how the gangster life isn't always glamorous, and that's a way of looking at your decision, looking at all the people who died in Goodfellas, the people who survived in Goodfellas maybe live worse lives than the people who died. You know what I'm
Mm,
saying? The prison of, eating ketchup on your noodles,
mm.
for the rest of your life until you get a podcast. I think Henry Hill's got a podcast
I
now.
think he does.
You know what I'm saying? He's like,
Yeah.
I can finally get on the mic and talk about all these times I got pinched. It's like,
Yeesh.
okay, buddy. I think
Yeah.
that might be over. I think Scorsese did it better than you can. No, there's a bunch of tales. I got it in this print on demand book about gangsta life.
Dude,
Uh,
the entire niche of like it's sort of the dirty underbelly of Italian American culture. Like all these fucking washed up whether they're actors or actual mobsters or mob adjacent, like all these people who try to turn like being a mobster into a living, but like a
mhm.
straight living as opposed to
Yeah.
actually being a mobster
It's
is
like,
just so like cringy.
it's
I
like,
can't get behind
eh,
that.
Maron, I gotta fucking do this 1099. I made too much money on my Patreon. It's
Exactly.
just like, what the fuck? This is so
Oh,
gangster, buddy. This is
oh,
the
fuck.
gangsteriest shit ever. But as that was a digression, the whole point is all of the different ways in movies we can examine death. Like even something like, and I hate to end on this downer, but one of the deaths that I never liked because I didn't feel like it meant anything was like Han Solo's death. I felt like it
Mm,
meant that Harrison Ford wanted to not do the movies anymore, and people who like the movies, our good buddy, our good buddies from Octo Radio, you know what
mm.
I'm saying? Alden Diaz knowing all the stuff about the prequels and being able to explain why all they must be. I know that he could do it. But bro, I didn't like that. I'd rather Han Solo die in a fucking, I don't know, a car crash. I'd rather he get sucked up into the tornado that killed Pa Kent than get
Ah,
than get stabbed
oh God.
ignominiously.
I mean, if we're just
Talk
gonna
about
throw,
shitty deaths.
dude, if we're just gonna throw out shitty deaths, honestly, like, does Star Wars have one good death in any of the movies?
I mean, you're supposed to think that Vader's is good.
But see, I mean, I would almost say the Emperor has the best death. Like, fucking, he gets lifted over Darth Vader's head as force lightning shoots everywhere and thrown down a giant hole. Like, I'll take that. But like
Yeah.
every other death in Star Wars, at least in the movies, is so underwhelming. I mean, fucking Boba Fett
Starting
going
with
out,
Obi-Wan Kenobi, Boba
starting with
Fett. Yeah.
Obi-Wan. Yep. I
Yeah.
mean, even Qui-Gon, like, I don't know, gets
Yeah.
stabbed in the gut after like waving his lightsaber around a bunch. Darth Maul's death, I guess, is kind of cool. He gets chopped in half and falls down a hole, but
No,
then he
I'll
doesn't
go
really
to
die.
bat for that one being bad because they got you dead to rights. You're at his feet. There's no way you could flip up directly in front of him, slash him, and do a flip over him without him doing stuff with his double-sided light. There's no way. If
Mm,
what's the use of the force? What's the use of all those kung fu moves, all that flipping and dipping that he was doing just a minute ago, fighting both of y'all? And now he's
hmm
gonna get you have the low ground. He has the high ground. You have the low ground. There's no way for you to win. There was no way for you to get the high ground without getting sliced in half yourself. If you force pushed him, maybe, and then flipped or something. I don't know. We're not gonna get down that rabbit hole. I'm just saying, like that is a bad death. Don't put that in the good pile because that's a bad one too.
I'm telling you, man. Like, and I even like the ending of The Last Jedi, but like that was a little bit all right. Now we need to get Luke Skywalker out of the movie out of the movies so that he doesn't save the day. So, oh, he
Mm-hmm.
overexerted himself and became one with the Force. See ya. Like,
Bye.
bye. I mean, honestly, best death in all of the Star Wars movies. That fucking Jedi kid that goes, Master Skywalker, what are we going to do? Give it up for that kid. Martyr for the cause.
Minor for the fucking cause. But yeah, well, okay. As a dismount, do you think we've talked about like the deaths of comic book characters? I think there's a couple of them that stood the test of time,
Hmm.
and I just want to talk about one of them, the Gwen Stacy one. Do you think it was worth it? I'm gonna say yes, by the way, to like bring Gwen Stacy back in Spider Gwen form, not in clone bullshit form, fucking with the
Right.
Jackal, not that bullshit. Because I think that really tarnished in a big way Gwen Stacy's death. The clones of her and her, like, I think she had twin clones or clones had daughters or some weird bullshit they did with, I think, Osborn and the Jackal.
Oh yeah. She was retconned into having had an affair with Norman Osborn before she died.
Oh, oh,
Yeah.
oh.
But see, and this goes back to I think one of the first ones we talked about. If we've learned anything from both Spider Gwen and Gamora, it's like if you want more mileage out of a dead character, go the alternate universe route. Like
Mhm, mhm.
create a new milieu in which you can explore that character, in different circumstances. Don't just bring them back into the story for the sake of bringing them back into the same story. Like that always sucks. Even like Bucky turning into the Winter Soldier is a cool story, but the fact that the Winter Soldier then sticks around and now they have to figure out what to do with the guy kind of
Yeah.
sucks.
Yep. I agree with you, man. It's like the alternate universe is like, okay, that's a second chance on life. But if you just bring back the same person, it's not a second chance on life. It's a second chance to be boring and status quo,
Yeah.
which isn't the jam. The multiverse characters are more interesting. They yield all these possibilities by their
And
very existence.
and I'll just do one more free plug for no other reason than I really enjoyed it. Across the Spider-Verse gets into in a real way that idea of like how using characters in alternate universes kind of allows you to tell stories that rhyme but aren't forced and like where you're coming up with all these complex, like, I don't want to spoil anything in the movie, but it's like rather than find some ham-fisted way to make Gwen Stacy live again in the 616, create a universe where Gwen Stacy never dies, but some other crazy shit happens because it why do we care about just having the same thing we've always had? Oh, but this one character has never died. Like the more
Mhm.
interesting storytelling device is okay, create a world in which they haven't died, but other dramatic occurrences have happened. And so our status quo becomes completely different. And now you have a new sandbox to play in. Like that, I think, is just a better use of the resurrection trope.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just gonna pitch as we dismount here. This is the end of the episode, but you can catch our addendum of this because there is definitely an addendum on greatest deaths. I'll throw one out there right now. An alien, Charles S. Dutton, Alien 3, Charles S. Dutton punching an alien and getting killed in a boxing match with a fucking alien. Hey, honorable mention death, man. We can't fit it into this episode. So patreon.com/the greatest pod. We're going to have a whole bunch of those on an episode. And I'm going to get into some of the ignominious deaths as
Mm-hmm.
well. But this one was about the ones that really affected us in a pop culture way. And what really affects us is you giving us a 5-star review.
Of course.
Goddamn.
Of
Giving us a
course.
5-star review is awesome. It's a great way to communicate with us because we read every single review that we get. So please review the podcast. Please join the Patreon, patreon.com/the greatest pod. Please watch the greatest pod YouTube channel. And
Mm.
please send us emails. Where can they send us emails at, Bill?
You would send to, and you have to type this all out, email the greatest pod. Include the word email, but no spaces, no punctuation. Email the greatest pod at gmail.com. This has been the autopsied, embalmed, buried episode of
The greatest pod.